All right, class. First off, as always, good day. I'm glad you're here. So, today we are going to be talking about cultural communities, and we're going to be talking about how the immigrants came from the European area, how they came over here, but mainly we're going to be focusing on the Asian community, how they came to be here in the United States. Okay. Because again, there's some of you guys have already heard this me talked about this in class, but a lot of the stuff taught in school nowadays about Europeans, the Irish, the Scottish, the Italians, things like that, how they came to this country, and not much is really said about the Asian immigrants who came over. So that's what I really want to talk about is those guys because their story is not really told. You don't get to learn about this stuff until like you're in college and chances are you have to be a history major to hear this stuff. You hear different things like, hey, they helped with the railroad, things like that, but you don't really know what life was like for them. You're not really taught that stuff in high school. So that's why I wanted to really, yeah, talk a little bit about the European immigrants, but mainly focus on the Asian immigrants who came over to this country. So we're going to analyze the importance and significance of cultural communities. Why do we have them? Why do they exist even to this day? We're going to examine the difference between how European and Asian immigrants were processed. You're going to see the amount of time that was done. You're going to see a significant difference in the two. And we're going to create an argument on whether nativist people have an argument to their case and their claims. You're going to find out about that later on. But first, your warm up. So here is your warm up picture. The first question asks you to basically analyze the picture, and on the sign, who is allowed in this country and who's not. And it says on the list there who is and who isn't. Okay. The second question asks you what four attributes or characteristics, traits, things like that, does this guy bring to our country? So if you look around him, there's four things labeled around him. What are those four things? Okay, so pause the video, write your response, okay, because we're moving on in 3, 2, 1. All right, now, again, a flood of Europeans came into America, and they came for different reasons, okay? A lot of them came because there was jobs here in the United States, a lot of factories being created in the North, so they're like, hey, can get a job over there. Some people, especially young men, were escaping because they didn't want to be in the military for their country. Most countries, even to this day, you turn a certain age, you have to sign up for the military and you have to serve for so many years. Some people left because of religious persecution, specifically Jewish people in Poland and Russia. Yeah, they came, but other people came too because of religious reasons. And now at this time, there were fewer immigration regulations. Now, what does that mean? Because, well, back in the day, especially in Europe, their government didn't really let certain people leave. There were some old laws that were around. So basically saying like, if you're a skilled worker, let's say you're a good painter, you are a great architect, things like that, they wanted you to stay in their country because they wanted you to create and build and or do whatever for their country and not for some other country, especially America. You know, um, Now the peasants back in the old laws, they had to basically ask for permission. They had to ask their lords, things like that. Can I get on my servitude for you to go to America? You know, and sometimes they said yes, sometimes they said no. Some people ran away. you know, so yeah, okay. So now the thing is the trip. it didn't take as long as it did back in the day with like the pilgrims and stuff like that. It didn't take that long, but it still is a long time compared to nowadays. It took about 2 weeks. And imagine being on a boat going back and forth, rocking, up and down, back and forth, things like that for 2 weeks. A lot of people got sick. A lot of people kind of felt wheezy. Normal person would go to get some air, things like that, right? The thing is, a lot of the people, they didn't stay in cabins up on top. A lot of people came in the steerage, which is the bottom level of the ship. Um, Down there, it was cramped. People were elbow to elbow type of thing. People were sick because again, 2 weeks on a boat. Maybe there might be one doctor, maybe you're lucky. They had very few restrooms, and the place was not clean. So if you're swaying back and forth, someone gets motion sickness and they throw up. There you go. If the toilet, the restroom backed up, that stuff might get on the floor and it's going to be swishing, 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 So, yeah, it could be pretty bad, I know it kind of seems sick, but I'm trying to give you guys an illustration. And this is not just the Europeans this is happening to. This is also the Asian immigrants who came over, too. They went through the same type of experience on the boats. Now, immigrants from Europe, they went to Ellis Island. Now, if you've seen the movie like Godfather 2, things like that, when young Don Corleone comes into America, everyone gets onto the edge of the ship and they're looking at the Statue of Liberty and things like that. They get processed. They're in a big old line and they're asked what's your name, where are you from. They check them for diseases and things like that. That's the kind of stuff they did. Okay, they did do that. And the thing is, it usually took about a day if everything was checked out well. The person was good to go, no diseases, no fleas, things like that. Then yeah, they could. Hey, there you go. Here's your paperwork. Adios. But if they were sick, they did have some disease, they would be quarantined, and things like that. Now, many immigrants, they would go to big towns, New York, Chicago, Milwaukee, Detroit, things like that. And what they would do is kind of congregate together, take a little portion of a town, So they carved their own little part of the city. So that's why we have places like Little Italy, Little Chinatown. In New York, they have like the Lower East Side. That's the Jewish community. So every basically culture had their own little part of the city. Now, why is this big? Well, because in those communities, they could speak their own native language. You go to Little Italy, the people are going to be speaking Italian there. Also, some of them the churches, they may not have a mosque. They might not have a particular church that some people left their country for. They may not have it here. So they had to build their own churches. When I put down here clubs, I don't mean like dance clubs, things like that, but more like a social groups, like guys who got together and talked politics, or guys who got together and they met and discussed, hunting, I don't know, things like that, those type of clubs. Okay. And also they even created their own newspapers. So let's say in a community like Italy, somebody might get a letter from their aunt talking about what's happening in northern Italy. Somebody might have an uncle who's telling them about in the middle of Italy. Somebody might have a brother who's still in the lower part of Italy, and they sent the letter to America. So then they would say, hey, this was happening in the north, this was happening in the middle, this was happening in the south, and they would put it in the newspaper and let people know still what's happening in their native country. So they were still informed. whether there was a war going to happen or what's happening, locally in politics over there, things like that. So people were well informed of what was happening. All right, so here's your first question. What are some pros and cons of living in a cultural community? Okay, so again, this is the area where it's like predominantly Italian, predominantly Chinese, predominantly Japanese, predominantly Jewish, predominantly Russian, whatever. Okay, so what's one good thing about living in a place like that? But also, what's one bad thing about living in a place like that? So remember, these guys just came from another country. They're coming here to America, and they're moving into this community that's basically like home. So what could be a bad thing about living in a place like that? Again, remember, they're in America. Think about certain things like jobs. Think about things like, do every person in a country get along? Things like that. So start really letting your brain go off and think, why'd they come here in the first place? If they wanted to be in their country, they left it. So why they come into a new country, and trying to live in a place that's exactly like their old place? So what's a good thing about that? And what's a bad thing about that? Okay, so write your responses. Okay, pause the video because we're moving on in 3, 2, 1. All right, so now let's talk about what's happening in China. Okay, now people in China left too for certain reasons. One of the number one reasons is their population reached 430 million people. In our country right now, in the United States, right now, as of January 1st, 2022, we have 332 million people. We still haven't reached that number of people like China had back in the 1880s, 1850s and things like that. So they had a ton of people, a lot, and this was what brought up the little emperor rule, which is basically that they told couples you could only have one kid. And yes, a lot of times they really wanted a boy, to carry on the name. It's not that they didn't have any girls; it was just that it was kind of looked down on if you had girls, but boys, yes, you wanted boys. That carries on your name, So yeah, okay. Because the population was so high, there was enough jobs for everyone. Even being a farmer, that there was enough room for that. And even then, let's say they did hire everyone couldn't have a job. Hey, we'll be a farmer. Well, even the farmers couldn't pay them. They couldn't pay them a good wage. So that's where it brought out poverty. People didn't have enough money. People were working jobs and they were getting paid dirt nothing because, again, no jobs, not enough jobs for everyone. And then also famine kicked in. Food shortages, the crops have a disease, bacteria, insects destroyed the crops, the weather did. So there's a lot of factors that came in and basically cut down the food supply. So people died of starvation. Another thing that happened in 1848 was the gold rush. Gold was discovered here in California, and in 1849, everybody and their mama around the world came to the United States, specifically San Francisco, to look for gold. Little quick thing about that, they had so many boats in San Francisco at one point because everyone was coming in to get gold. Nobody was leaving. So all these boats were just like clambered up on the bay. What the city of San Francisco decided to do was basically bust up all those boats, put dirt on them, and basically make more land. So if you ever go to San Francisco and you're like, wow, this is nice. I'm at the coast. especially if you're on the west side of it, down below you is old busted boats from the Gold Rush era. It's pretty neat. If you're ever there and you taking a tour or something like that, you should ask the person like, "Hey, where's the boats, the Gold Rush boats that are underneath?" And they might be surprised that you know that, and they'll tell you about that. The other thing that happened was the Taiping Rebellion, which was pretty bad. And anytime there's rebellions and things like that, usually the people who are hurt the most are civilians, people who are not involved. They're just caught in the crossfire, and that's what happens. A lot of people are scared for their lives because the rebellion is, yeah, these guys are fighting, but innocent people are dying left and right. So they're like, you know what, let's just leave that. They get on the boat, come on over to the United States. Now, people from the Pacific, China, Japan, Mongolia, Korea, places like that, they got processed to Angel Island. Okay, so if you ever go to San Francisco, you'll see Alcatraz, and there's a place near it, a little island called Angel Island. That's where they got processed. Now, one of the only jobs that the newly arrived Asian immigrants could get was working on the railroad, and they did it, no problem. Hey, that's a job I have to do. Fine, I'll do it. Some people, they did have some money. They would, try to mine, trying to find gold, things like that. But the only job that was really just like, if you want one, here it is working the railroads. Now, a lot of the Asians, basically all of them, were discriminated against. They were looked down upon. Some of them tried to go to a store to buy things. They were tossed out. They were refused to be sold things. Because a lot of people back then would be like, "Well, I don't sell to your kind," type of thing. So they couldn't buy things. So what they did was actually pretty smart. They created their own businesses. Yeah, they actually went off, made their own little business, and they would sell things. Now, it was predominantly made to sell things to other Asian immigrants. But thing is, sometimes they sold things cheaper than their white counterparts. And so some people would go to the Asian markets because, like, hey, it's cheaper there. So they went to that store. And so a lot of Asians who had stores actually became pretty rich. They actually did pretty well, and again, that was not their intention. Their intention was not to make a bunch of money. It was more to, hey, we need supplies. Let's open up a store and get these supplies to ourselves and people, our people. So, yeah, it's a pretty fun, interesting thing how that turned out. All right, so predominantly the majority of the immigrants who came during the 1850s to the 1900s were predominantly Chinese. Japanese, not too much. They were the minority. But in 1900 to 1908, that changed. And a lot of Japanese immigrants came over to San Francisco. Okay. Now, from the 1800s up until 1910, the people who came were processed in a 2-story shed on the wharf in San Francisco. And it basically fit like 500 people. So if you live in an apartment that has like 2 stories, with little stairs, just imagine if there's one story right here of one apartment building, and there's another apartment on top. Those two, let's just say, even though they are bigger than a shack, imagine fitting 500 people in there. That place would be pretty crowded, right? Imagine a place half, and cut that in half again, that size. Imagine that fitting 500 people. It'd be elbow to elbow, right? And that's exactly how it was. It was very uncomfortable. It was cramped and things like that. So in 1910, in January of that year, the Angel Island opened up a kind of little housing thing for the immigrants. So they said, yeah, that's way too tight. That's even for us. Jesus, they're like packed in there. So they moved them over to Angel Island. A lot of the guys there were in their teens, early 20s, things like that. And here's the thing, unlike their European counterparts, their process took months. Months. Where in Ellis Island it took like a day. Boom, 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 off you go. Whereas in Angel Island, the process took months. So these guys had to basically live there. And it's like, oh yeah, the paperwork's taking forever to go through. It really wasn't, but they just wanted to make their experience hell, you know. So some Asian immigrants wrote poetry on the walls, and that's what you see those little scratches are. It's their writing. They wrote on there. It's still there to this day, from my understanding, from what I've been told from people who actually went there. That's still there. You can see it, and it's pretty interesting. Do you have a chance? You should really go see it. Okay, so the Asian Exclusion Act. This happened in 1882. It barred Chinese immigrants from coming into the country for 10 years and prevented those who were in the country from being citizens. Okay, now the thing is, you have to remember, the Chinese people have been here for the longest time. They've been there, again since the gold rush. So they've been there for like 30 years up to this point. And now they were saying, no, 10 years where no more Chinese can come, and they can't be citizens. So those are already here. Like, well, dude, I've already lived here so long. I have a child who lives here. They are born here. They are a citizen. No. They can't be citizens. And yes, I had a student ask me in class, well, what about Chinese? Well, here's the thing. Just like nowadays when people say, oh, where are you from? If you look Latino, there's some Americans here who figure, oh, you're Mexican. But they're probably from Guatemala, Colombia, Uruguay, Chile. But they speak Spanish, so, oh, you have to be Mexican. So they kind of clump them up. Same thing happened back then. A Japanese, a Korean, a Mongolian, anyone who looked Asian was basically put into this group of you're Chinese, But again, Chinese people who already lived here were protesting, and they argued. They had a good argument. They said, why are you picking on us? Saying that there are so many of us. Why aren't you picking on the Germans? Why aren't you picking on the Italians? Why aren't you picking on the Irish? Why us? We are nowhere near the numbers that they came in. Why are you attacking us? It fell on deaf ears. They even put a petition to the president saying, sir, this is wrong, things like that. Again, the president didn't even bother. They even tried to file a lawsuit against the U.S. government. But here's the problem. The Chinese Exclusion Act says that they're not citizens. If you're not a citizen, you have no rights in this country. So that did away with the lawsuit. So 10 years passed. 1892, they renewed the act. 1902, some of the Asian Americans are like, okay, they have to realize by now that we are not a threat. We are good people. We do things that average people do. We're good people. 1902, they make it permanent that this law, this act, is permanent forever. In 10 years' time, the Chinese population just dropped. Down to like 30%. And what happened was the Chinese people here in this country didn't get the right to be called a citizen until 1943. Because I don't know if you know what's happening at this time in the 1940s. World War II is happening. The United States got bombed in Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. There's only one group of people on this earth who hated Japanese worse than Americans, and that's the Chinese. So the Chinese people hated Japanese people. They didn't get along. They really didn't get along for centuries. So the United States is like, well, you know, hey, we're going to do some stuff to Japan. We might need your help. China's like, oh, that's cool and everything, but we still have citizens over there. We have people who, like, who've been there forever, and you don't see them as citizens. You treat them like second-class citizens. You treat them like how you treat the African Americans and stuff like that. You don't see them as citizens, even though they were born there, even though they've been there forever. So the act was lifted and removed in 1943. That's the only reason, because we needed a friend over on that side of the world who hated Japan just as much as us. That's the reason. So here's my next question to you. Why do you think the Asian Americans' history, why do you think their history isn't told as much as the European counterparts? Why do you think they're not taught about this kind of stuff in other history classes? What do you think? Or even in the past, why do you think they don't teach this? Okay, so think about it. Write your response, because we're moving on in 3, 2, 1. All right, so nativist. This is basically an idea, a thought that was sweeping through the country. There are people in this country who basically saw the Asians, the Jewish people, and Eastern European people as like a blight to our country. These guys are taking from the system. They're making us worse than we are. They're bringing us down. We're up here, and now that they're here, we're down here. They're just horrible for our country, and why can't they be like the old immigrants? The old immigrants were perfect. These guys are just They just they do nothing for us, for our country. This is the argument they would give. So on your paper in the back, I believe it's number 19, you're going to fill out that chart, okay? So when they talk about old immigrants, they mean like the English, the French, people like that, people who've been here, okay? New immigrants, again, the like Italians, the Jewish people, Asians, Latin. So when it comes to old immigrants, when it comes to money, they're like, well, they all weren't poor. They had some money. These guys brought money with them from the old country to here, and they brought gold and silver and jewels and things like that. These new immigrants, they're just dirty and they're poor and they bring nothing. They have nothing of value. They bring nothing to this country. That's the way they saw it. Okay. Now, when it came to education, they saw it as, well, these old immigrants, the ones from England and France, they could read, they could write, they had some type of skill that could really help out our country. These new immigrants, they can't even talk in English. They can't even read in English. They do nothing for our country. They just are there. They just, they don't do nothing for us. It's like, well, duh, they are from Asia. They're from Italy. They're from Russia, from the Middle East. Of course they don't know English. They're from Latin America. Of course they don't know English. The English would know English. Well, I hope so, because they're from stinking England. But that's how they saw it. Like, these guys, they can't even understand a word I'm saying. They're so uneducated. They're so barbaric and talking like that. Yeah, what are they saying? It's like, that's how these guys were thinking. Okay, if this sounds kind of familiar, is this kind of the same stuff being said today by certain people? Okay, let's keep going. When it comes to adjusting to a new culture, they're like, oh yes, they just embrace, the old immigrants embrace the American spirit. They believe in it. They glide right into our beliefs. New immigrants, they're so into their old ways. They bring their old laws. They're trying to change our laws the way their country is. They don't know how to be like us. They celebrate certain holidays that we don't celebrate. They're trying to change us. They're trying to make us be like them. Ugh. you know when it comes to previous countries, they're the old immigrants. They came from democratic countries. They understand that people have the power. They believe that in voting and things like that. The new immigrants, they all bow to somebody. The Catholics, they bow to a pope. The the Middle East, they bow to their rulers. The Asians, they bow to their emperors. Just you know, they have to bow to somebody. The reality is like, no, that's probably why they're leaving, because they don't want to bow to somebody. The last one is, religion. The nativists saw them as the ultimate. Oh, they're Protestant, they're Christian, they believe in the same values we do. These new immigrants, they're Catholics. They worship statues. These Jewish people. They're the people who killed Jesus. These Orthodox people, they don't do the same religious stuff we do. They're barbarians. These Muslims, they don't even believe in Jesus. They don't even think he's a Messiah. And, they're just so horrible. They're so evil. They're so uncouth. Again, you see how the difference is, how they're viewing old immigrants and new immigrants, and their arguments just don't make sense. And here's the thing, though, the sad thing, these are still the same arguments people say to this day about immigrants coming into our country, refugees coming to our country. They say the exact same thing. It's the same thing that's been said for the past 140 years. Same thing. They haven't changed their tone. They like playing that little song and dance. So, here's my question to you. Do you think nativist people have an argument about the old and new immigrants? Okay. Now, you just heard me give a little spill, putting my own personal thoughts into it. That's my personal thoughts. This is your personal thought. Okay. So if you say, yes, they have an argument, you're not going to be graded like, he disagreed with me, I'm going to put him. No, he's not going to get points. No, because again, I gave my opinion, even though I didn't mean to. Kind of just, again, that's how I feel about that kind of stuff. But you have your opinion, and I want to know your opinion. Okay? I'm not going to look at you any different. I'm not going to grade you any different. Now, how I'm going to grade you is going to grade you the same way that you say yes or no. Did you answer it? Did you copy off anybody? You better not have. And is your response, makes sense? Okay? So you could say, yes, they have an argument. Or you could say, no, they don't have an argument. But say whichever one and why. Explain why you feel that way. Okay? So, writing prompt is on the bottom. Go ahead and go at it. Pause the video because we're moving on in 3, 2, 1. All right, so now we've come to your exit ticket. Remember, you're going to answer one of these questions. Do you think cultural communities help or hurt new immigrants coming to our country? And why do you believe this? The second one says, do you think native people believed that do you think that native people believed what they believed because they were racist, just scared that there might be more immigrants than them, or for some other reason? Why do you think they think those certain things and felt that certain way? And the last one is, why do you think so many Asian Americans were targeted so much more than the European counterparts? Why were they picked on? Why was this act, the Chinese Exclusion Act, focused on them when there was nowhere near as many of them as there was the European immigrants? There was only about 300,000 who came, whereas And for the European Americans, there was like 30, 40, 50, million that came. So, I mean, why would you pick on this small group? So tell me what you think. Okay. Once you've written your response, that's it. You finish this lesson. Hopefully you learned something new. Hopefully you enjoyed it. All right. So you guys, you take care, you be safe, and I'll see you guys later. Okay.